So the topic for us today is power and politics in medicine, engendering the Ayurvedic record. Understanding and analyzing the theme of gender in the Ayurvedic discourse is a study in finding specificity in ambivalence. While on the one hand, the medical system undisguisedly discusses the nuances and ambiguities of bodies at length. For instance, Ayurveda will tell you whether one particular limb, maybe it's the femur or the tibia, should be referred to with a male pronoun or a female pronoun. What kind of milk? Is it the buffalo's milk? Is it the goat's milk? Is it the cow's milk? Which is most nourishing? So it goes into great length to analyze bodies. And it often refuses to gloss over differences and divergences. And sometimes you also see it goes beyond normative binary categories. But on the other hand, it is also engaged in the creation of new hierarchies or in the reinforcing of old frameworks and old power equations, but in very novel ways. The production of knowledge as well as the weaving of a medical narrative within the Ayurvedic text betray a not so weird attempt to bring bodies within the realm of regulation or under the purview of a Brahmanical worldview, one which is absolutely linked to the Varnasrama Dharma worldview of Brahmanism, in which every vein, every bone, every organ and limb was named, theorized, ordered, or quote-unquote regulated. Stephanie Jameson, while writing on the onerous task of a historian, particularly an ancient historian like me, trying to unearth women's roles or experiences or agency or position within the Vedic corpus, notes that these are texts which are written by men, preserved by men for men, as the foundation and support for an elaborate, well-organized and institutionalized religious system. How can we even hope to glimpse women's experiences in this structure? We must take these texts and tell things that their composers did not think that they were saying, or those things which the composers were trying to hide. So we must be able to read between the lines. We must interrogate the silences and the pauses. And that is indeed the approach that has been followed by me, like several other historians and archaeologists, a certain probing of the material to figure out the intricacies of the representing of female experiences and female biological processes, as well as female medical actors in the Ayurvedic text. Now, the female body was one which was to be understood as being different. It was not the ideal male body. It was not considered to be the same as the virile, potent male body. It was certainly different, but it was useful. A body which was integral to the working of a Brahmanical system, but a body which was also liminal, a body which was looked at with a certain kind of amusement, but with a certain kind of suspiciousness as well. So a body which had to be tamed, a body which was to be strictly bound to fit patriarchal definitions. Now, you might be prompted to ask me, why have I titled the talk as Power and Politics in Medicine? And there's a politics behind it as well. It is precisely because far too often power has been understood as state power, as only political power, particularly in the writing of South Indian history. Unfortunately, our historians or our historiography has not explored the world of intrapersonal or interpersonal power, or that of power manifesting in the domestic sphere, which spills over into the political or the public or the non-religious or the non-household sphere as well. There has been hundreds of books published on the private sphere, on the private lives of Mesopotamian civilization, on the private life of Egyptian pharaohs. There is an entire branch of study called household studies, but all of this is found wanting both in Indian historiography as well as in South Indian historiography, which has largely been plagued by the problem of androcentrism. Now, I'm not referring to it as a patriarchal bias, because there was no aversion to women's studies if you look at South Indian historiography. Rather, The framework was one in which where the state was far too often the focus of almost all history writings. Hence, we have to decenter the idea of power from the hands of the kings, from the hands of the state, and find it elsewhere. And I am trying to locate the same in the functioning of the body, in the functioning of medicine, in the way that medicine constructed or deconstructed bodies. And there is a politics to it. And hence the title, Power and Politics in Medicine. The representation of the female body, the functions and roles that it was expected to perform, and the possibilities of subverting straight-jacketed or monolithic definitions of ascribed gender roles which are given to men, women, transgenders, or intersexed people, and the interlocking of gender with other identities, such as that of sexuality, such as that of caste, will be the major research question that we will be taking up in the course of this talk, which will be divided into two themes. One on female bodily processes and how these were represented. For instance, how was menstruation represented? How was pregnancy represented? What were pregnant women thought of as? The second section will be on women medical actors, or the role played by women as medical personnel. So even though the Ayurvedic literature, unlike other Brahmanical or Sanskrit literature, has relatively more references to females and female processes, to understand the role played by women and the perception of women within these medical narratives, one of course has to read against the grain. Of course, it is the absences and the silences which tell us more about women's history than the voluminous text. Martha Ann Selby, in her brilliant article on women in Ayurveda, has tried to analyze the part played by women as medical agents or actors in early Ayurvedic literature, such as that of Charaka Samhita and Susruta Samhita. I shall also be trying to analyze the role of women in medical treatises ranging from the 2nd century CE to the 16th century CE, with an emphasis on the shifts and patterns that have been registered during this long period. While others such as Francis Zimmermann and Jan Muenbelt have concerned themselves with identifying linguistic patterns and have explored the semiotics of the language of Sanskrit, I am more interested in addressing the social context of the same, especially with regard to the notion of identities. I shall be using specific identities, in particular gender and varna, or gender and caste, as a vantage point on how medical literature constructs and reinforces power hierarchies. The first section will be on, as mentioned, female bodily processes, and the second on females working as medical personnel. Specific women's biological processes which I have taken up for the study include menstruation, pregnancy, childbirth, and sex determination. The choices have been governed by the data provided by the text, as the medical treatises have relatively abundant information on female bodily processes. The significant role played by women in provision of medical service, especially with regard to gynecology, post and prenatal care, as well as vet nurses, have been undervalued both in academic as well as popular writing. The importance of these services rises to prominence if we are to consider the extremely high maternal and infant mortality rates in the pre-modern world, particularly in the South Asian context. One of the most pertinent discussions of the talk will be on the textual representation of women as medical agents and the shifts marked in the representation as we move from the early to the medieval to the late medieval, and then to the early modern period. Now, we shall start this discussion off with a section on female bodily processes, but we'll also try, if time allows, for a section on the representation of transgendered, intersexed, or non-heteronormative or non-heterosexual individuals within the Ayurvedic record. So while anatomy plays a significant role in defining a woman, womanhood, which is separate from the definitions of woman, is understood as going through particular physical and biological processes which are specific to the feminine gender. Anatomy itself has been questioned now and deconstructed by those like Judith Butler and Anne Foster Sterling, and is no longer regarded as fundamental to being a woman. And this is hugely and very aptly in support of recognizing the biological as well as social rights of trans and intersex women. Now, in this context, one has to ask this question of what Ayurveda understood as personhood, or what Ayurveda understood as health, because these are questions which are very interlinked. So Ayurveda presented itself as a facilitating mechanism to achieve moksha. Now, this might seem fantastic to some of us who might think that Ayurveda is all and only about the Tridosha, Vayu, Pitta, and Kapha. Or some of us might think that it is only descriptions of the body, or that it has all this information of herbs to cure diseases. In fact, all three foundational texts of Ayurveda, whether it is Charaka Samhita or Susruta Samhita or the Vagbhata tradition, deal also with the metaphysics of the body, as much as they deal with the corporeality of the body, the semantic as well as the somatic. The bodily as well as the spiritual goes hand in hand in Ayurveda. In an epistemological variance with other medical traditions of other regions of the world, for instance, with that of Western medicine such as allopathy or Chinese medicine, which takes the body-soul binarity for a given and investigates the body primarily, Ayurveda is immensely concerned with the status of the soul, the Atma. Ayurveda is also concerned with questions such as the location of the Medha and the Manas, the functioning of the Prana, its entry and exit points, the constitution of the body. So we were discussing what Ayurveda's idea of health is, and Ayurveda's idea of health is inextricably linked to Ayurveda's idea of personhood. So Ayurveda presents itself as a facilitating mechanism to achieve moksha. Unlike many of the other medical traditions, it also engages with the metaphysics of the body. So if, for instance, I ask one of you the question, what is health? I see Lakshmi among the audience, like Ayana's there, Mark's there. So if I ask you a question, what is health? So some of us might be prompted to answer that health is the absence of disease. Yet others might answer that health is well-being. Yet others might answer that health is both physical and social well-being. Now, Ayurveda has a very particular answer. For Ayurveda, health indicates a normal condition of the doshas, because Ayurveda sees the body as being constituted by the Tridosha, also other elements, we'll get to that in a minute. So health indicates a normal condition of the doshas, Agni, Mala, and the dhatus of the body, as well as a serene state of the body, mind, and sense organs. Now, we will get back to this definition in a while, but please do remember the definition. Now, the answer which will be given by different acharyas of Ayurveda, whether it is Sushruta or Charaka, will differ from one another. And this is something that we need to interrogate. So if you ask Sushruta, Sushruta might answer that the body constitutes of the Tridosha, that is Vada, Pitta, and Kapha. Now, 4 centuries later, Bhavaprakasha might add its own theorization of the body. So Bhavaprakasha might say that the body constitutes of Vayu, Pitta, Kapha, the Srotas, the 8 Padarthas. Now, if you go to Yoga Ratnakara, which was written in the 16th century, it might have yet another definition of the body, where the body might be understood as a system which has the Tridosha, but one which is also influenced by other factors, like guna, the temperament of a person, like jati, the profession, or the varna status of a person. So this is what I am trying to point out, that there is no one single defining idea of the body in the entire Ayurvedic corpus, that it keeps changing with time, it keeps changing with region. But there is a general idea that any disruption or derangement of the tridosha along with other factors might lead to disease. But more on that in a while. So as if now, let it is suffice to say that Ayurveda conceptualizes health as harmony, as a harmony of Vayu, Pitta and Kama. Now, if you look at Rasarnava, a post-12th century Siddha Ayurveda text, it reveals some very interesting information on the role of medicine and the idea of health. So the general idea of the body, or what the body constitutes of, according to Rasarnava, is as an entity which has 7 layers. And it is also a body which can achieve moksha while being embodied, while being corporeal, while being physical. So the general idea of body as conceived in the Bhakti tradition, for instance, and in other thought systems such as Vaisheshika, was that the body is impermanent, that the body is perishable, as opposed to the soul which is eternal, as opposed to the soul which would attain moksha. So there was this idea that we will discard our corporeal or physical body and attain moksha, which is the state to be achieved. That is what you see in the Bhakti tradition, that is what you see in the Vaisheshika tradition and several other traditions. Hence the body in many of these traditions was understood as an outer covering of the soul. The soul body divide was taken as a given in many of these texts, and the impermanent or the perishable nature of the body was one which was emphasized upon. So the body is prone to temptation, the body is something that is prone to erring. But the soul was understood to be this refined, sophisticated, divine entity, the receptacle of which was the body. For instance, in the Bhagavad Gita, the idea of the soul body divide is capsulated in a very oft quoted sloka, which goes like this: Vamsani jirnani yada vihaya navani grihanati naroparani tada sharirani vihaya jirna nyayani samyati navani dehi. Just as a man casts off his soiled or worn out clothes and puts on new clothes, so also the embodied self takes off or discards worn out bodies and enters others which are new. There is an indication of the idea of reincarnation or rebirth here as well. But the counter argument to this idea of, that is the idea of the impermanent body, of the body as being degenerate, can be seen in the Ayurvedic corpus, which argues that even to attain moksha or even to move towards rebirth, the soul needs to be in a healthy body. Rasarnava also conceptualizes the body as consisting of 7 layers. It says that the body can only experience its full vitality, which will enable it to attain the status of moksha or of attaining the status of being a siddha through the application of appropriate rasas and by the rigorous practice of following a particular routine which is prescribed by Ayurveda. What the Ayurvedic texts are suggesting can be read as a countercurrent to the idea of the perishability or the impermanence of the body as projected by other traditions such as Bhakti. The body thus becomes an instrument in achieving moksha, the acquisition of which can only be achieved through an embodied process of rigorous praxis. Indeed, texts such as Rasaratnakara and Nityananda's Rasa Vijayam too follow similar patterns of argument. In the foundational text, Ayurveda argues that the body has to be healthy. Why? The body has to be healthy to perform life cycle rituals. And it is only the performance of life cycle rituals by a healthy body that can ensure the achievement of moksha. So what was health for Ayurveda? So these are questions which are still being intensely debated by organizations such as WHO, by the Department of Health, by the Ministry of Health, by state health departments. So Ayurveda also has its own ideas of health, as we looked at. And the primary idea seems to be that health is understood as harmony, a harmony of the tridoshas with the padharthas, a harmony of the tridoshas with the srotas. So let's go one step further and try to complicate the situation a little bit more and ask ourselves the question, What causes disease according to Ayurveda? So if you look at the foundational text, any disease is caused by a combination of about 12 elements. So you have the Tridosha, so you have three elements there, Vayu, Pitta and Kapha. And along with that, you have season or Kala. You have Guna, temperament. You have Desha, place or region. You have Jati and Varna. Now, one can of course claim that Jati, as it has been understood by other medical historians, may be a reference to only profession. But certainly, the social exclusionary tendencies of Jati and Varna has to be taken into concern. Similarly, even in the component called Guna, which is also constitutive of what causes disease according to Ayurveda, there is a component of caste. There are three gunas that are mentioned in the Ayurvedic record. So you can be a person who has the Rejo guna, or you can be a person who has the Tamo guna, or you can be a person who has a Sattviga guna. So people who have Rejo guna are the ones who are fierce, they're the ones who are aggressive, they're the ones who are fit to be a king. So people who have the Tamo guna, they're mellow. They're the ones who struggle with knowledge. They're the ones who are more slow or cold in nature. They're the ones which are best fit for manual labor. And then you have the Sattviga guna. They are the ones who are calm, who are sorted, who are the ones who are more spiritual. Now, if it stopped here, then we could somewhere say that you don't have discrimination or exclusion as part and parcel of the etiology or the causative factor of diseases in Ayurveda. But each of these gunas are also understood to be attributes of particular varnas. The Rajo guna being attributed to the Kshatriyas, the Tamo guna being attributed to the Shudras and sometimes the Vaishyas, and the Sattviga guna being attributed to the Brahmanas. So you have Varna and Jati being part of the etiology of disease in terms of Ayurveda or with regard to Ayurveda twice. So if I am an Ayurveda physician, for me to diagnose disease, I'll have to take into concern the Tridosha and how it functions in your body, the season, for instance, is it summer, is it winter? Is it the rainy season? The diseases that you have in the rainy season will not be the same as the ones you have in the winter season. Where do you come from? Do you come from the south of the country? Do you come from the north of the Indian subcontinent? Do you come from the western part of the Indian subcontinent? So Desha plays an important role. Guna, are you tamasic? Are you sattvic? Do you have Rajo guna? And then I also have to know your Jati. If I do not know any of this, or if even one component is missing, then according to the foundational text, I, as an Ayurvedic physician, will not be able to diagnose it. So I hope you understood the relevance of the social context of Ayurveda as a medical system. That it was the idea of Jati and Varna, as well as Kala and Desha and Tridosha, all being integral to the practice of Ayurveda as a system of medicine. So the Ayurvedic schemata, as you have seen, is quite complex. One which is imbued with complexity, but one which is also extremely focused, or as I might call it out, biased. The entire gamut of theorization centers around the fulcrum of the ideal male body. None of the sophistication is found in theorizing the female body or the intersexed body. The female body is conceived as a supplementary receptacle of the male seed, as the repository of male pleasure, as a reproductory instrument. While the male body, in comparison with the intersexed body, is understood to be the virile potent body. The transgendered body or the intersexed body, on the other hand, is conceived as the counter image or the other to the male body. Now, we will touch upon that later. And let's leap into the texts themselves. Sex determination, or knowing about the sex of the unborn child in the Ayurvedic record. The early texts refer to a lot of techniques to infer out the sex of the child. Let me also warn you that you shouldn't be trying any of this out, because these are from the 5th, 6th century, and you will realize how bizarre this is. So according to the texts themselves, one can either be born as a male child or a female child or an intersex child. While there is a clear preference for sons throughout early, medieval, and later Ayurvedic texts, we also find verses which suggest that there is no aversion to daughter. In fact, there are certain verses which suggest that after the birth of some sons, you can also prefer daughters. For instance, on the chapter on Shukra Shonita Shuddhi Shariram, there is a section on the steps to be followed to ensure the birth of a son. However, there is also similar steps for the birth of a female child. It is mentioned that for the birth of a son, the woman is to invite a priest, a Brahmana priest, to practice rituals which ensure the birth of a son. The man and the woman has to practice celibacy for a month, consume ghee or clarified butter, and unctuous foods for about a month. The birth of a male offspring is stated according to Charaka Samhita to be owing to the higher presence of the male seed in the combination of Shukla and Artava. Similarly, the presence of a higher proportion of Artava, the female seed, it leads to the birth of daughter. The birth of intersexed persons occur when the proportion of Shukla, the male seed, and Artava, the female seed, when both of them are in same proportions. The preference for sons is quite apparent throughout the text. It is a phenomena which remains constant. The daughter is not preferred, but is not derided either. For instance, Vangbata mentions some techniques for ensuring the birth of a child of a specific gender, among which one of the bizarre techniques is to put a drop of milk with a paste of Shvetabhyanath's root into the right nostril of the pregnant woman if you need a male child, and in the left nostril if you need a female child. This might seem to be very laughable to all of us, but at the same time, this shows that there was a certain preference for either male births or female births. The kind of derision or the kind of anxiety that the text display is towards intersex births. Now, intersex, which itself shows that maybe the number of intersex births was quite high. There was also a certain anxiety to avoid such kind of births, and the onus or the responsibility for avoiding intersex births was on both the father and the mother. There is a certain phrase used which indicates that there was no aversion for daughters. For instance, you have a phrase, Dukhita Vangche. There's that if you desire a daughter, which gives us a clue that maybe there was no daughter aversion. The anxiety about the birth of intersex persons or transgendered persons indicates that this might have been a very frequent occurrence in the early period, particularly from 2nd century CE to the 8th century CE. The references to these shrink subsequently as we move to the medieval period. For instance, Napumsaka births, I'm sorry for the use of the term, but the text referred to these births as Napumsakas. The other word which is used is Kleba. Now, if you use the term Kleba, it is collapsed with other categories such as that of homosexual people. So the Napumsaka births which are referred to in the Ayurvedic text, they shrink a lot when you move towards the medieval period. So if you have a lot of theorization, let's say in Charaka or Susruta or Vangmata tradition, if you look at the Lekhutrayi, you do not see references to Napumsakas in the Sharirasthana. Rather, you see references to Napumsakas only in the Vajigaranasthana, which the inference that one can make from it is that from the position of full human beings, they are being reduced to impotent males. From the idea of anokha births or births which are strange but which are still acceptable. When you move towards the medieval period, they are understood to be disorders or people who have certain bodily conditions. So Napumsaka, which is a reference to a full-fledged human being in the early period, shrinks to that of a bodily disorder by the 12th, 13th centuries. Now, quite amusingly, you have a right-left semiology at work in the Sharirasthana, where the right signifies the male and the left signifies the female. Very much like the dark and the light or the wet and the dry mentioned by Bordeaux in the case of the Berber house, or Amos Rapopo in the meanings of the Bill space. It is also mentioned that pregnant women who seem to hold the fetus on the left side and whose womb does not swell much and is slightly tilted towards the left will produce a female child. And if the stomach or the belly is slightly tilted towards the right, then the pregnant woman would produce a male child. Similarly, you have several restrictions which are mentioned in the foundational text as well as in the later text on the pregnant women. The restrictions placed on the pregnant woman and the menstruating woman are pretty much the same. So it is instructed to the pregnant woman that she ought not sleep during the day, that she should not line her eyes with kajal, she should not take a bath, she should not cut her fingernails, she should not talk excessively, she should not laugh out aloud, she should not be exposed to loud noises, so on and so forth. Each of these having a very direct impact on the child that she will be giving birth to. So now we might find this laughable, but do compare Ayurveda to other schools of medicine. For instance, in Hippocratic medicine, now Hippocrates is understood to be the father of medicine. So if you look at the Hippocratic text from around the same time, the theorization of the female body was as one which has a floating womb. So female bodies were understood to be cold body. So everything that the male had on the outside, now the female would have on the inside. So you had a certain theorization where the womb was supposed to be this particular organ which moved around in a female body. So the womb would move from the abdominal cavity towards the torso and then towards the head. And when it reaches the head, women become hysteric. And hence you have the term hysteria, which is connected to the Greek word, which is the same as that which is used for the womb. So this was the theorization that you had in Greek medicine, and one which was borrowed by Galen later as well. And here in Ayurveda, you can see a slightly different version, but which shows an ignorance about the female body, or a certain kind of knowledge about only the reproductive functions of the female body, and a mere absence of theorization on any other biological process. So there are several indexes of what women can do during menstruation, what women can't do during menstruation, what women can do during pregnancy, what women are supposed to do immediately after giving birth, what women are supposed to do 3 months after giving birth, and then it stops. So there is no theorization on Sthana Roga, which is mentioned but is not theorized upon. There is no theorization on menopause. There is very little theorization on menarche. So one can very clearly see that from the Ayurvedic record, you have several references to the reproductive capacities of women. You also have references to structural elements. For instance, there are chapters on the construction of the Sutika Griha. Now, the Sutika Griha is a chamber in which a pregnant woman is housed. This is the same chamber in which a menstruating woman is supposed to be housed, and this is far away from the normal residence. Now we are in a period of quarantining and in a period of lockdown. The very first kind of quarantine that we find mentioned to in Sanskrit literature, and particularly in medical literature, is that of menstrual quarantining. Unfortunately, it is a practice which continues even today in South India. You have an excellent work by C. Mantani Niranjana on gender and space, which talks about menstrual huts. So menstrual quarantine is sanctioned by the logic of Ayurveda. Now one can of course rationalize and justify it if one needs to believe it. But if you are looking at Ayurveda from a social context, one must also be very, very careful in understanding that Ayurveda is not science. It's pseudoscience. I'm not calling it fake science. It is a branch of medico-ritual knowledge which is edging towards becoming a healing system. So it reinforces the Varnashrama Dharma worldview of Brahmanism. And its purpose, if you look at the way that it theorizes jati, if you look at the way that it theorizes gender, it's exclusionary by nature. And I can show you dozens, no, I can show you hundreds of verses where women and intersex people or people belonging to the lower varna are considered to be inferior. Now, if you look at, for instance, the qualities that are required for a wet nurse or someone who is called as a dhatri in the Ayurvedic record. Now, it very clearly mentioned, now who's a wet nurse? A wet nurse is someone you employ to suckle, to breastfeed your child if you do not produce enough breast milk. So, in choosing a dhatri, there is an entire chapter on how dhatri should be chosen in Ayurveda. So, in choosing a dhatri, these are the prerequisites. So, Charaka Samhita says she should be of the same caste, she should be youthful, submissive, free from diseases, not deficient of limbs, not given to luxurious living, not ugly looking, not given to hateful disposition, born in the same locality, not mean-minded, not given to mean acts, having living children, having sons, having plenty of milk, careful, not given to sleeping over clothes soiled, not having a husband of lower caste. And then towards the very end, you have a mention of having the excellence of breasts and milk. So that comes as the last criteria. It comes way after same caste, you being youthful, being submissive, so on and so forth. Now, this is something that you not only see in the choice of the wet nurse. You can see caste at work and gender at work in the choice of who can be a physician. The nouns that are used and the pronouns that are used are always in the masculine gender. So to find a sa instead of a saha, the saha is used for he and sa is used for she. You have to wait till Yoga Ratnakara, which is a 16th century text, which mentions a Vaidya Narya, a female physician, or a Vaishya, or in Bhava Pragasha, you have reference to a Vaishajya with a sa. So it is only by the 16th and the 17th century that you see female physicians being part of the medical record. But this does not mean that females were never part of the, were never medical actors. You have females working as dhatris or wet nurses. You have references to aptaha striya, women who are expert in prenatal and postnatal care. You have references to paricharakas or medical attendants. You have references to women who are informants to the Ayurveda acharyas. But one needs to look for them. Now, while Ayurveda has a lot of references to female medical actors as well as female biological processes, one can very well see that these are all placed very much within the normative fold. The female body itself is understood to be a body which is to be brought under control as a receptacle of the male seed, as one which is supposed to give pleasure to the male body, but one which is understood to be definitely supplementary to the male body. Now, we do not have time to get into a discussion about intersex bodies, but just to mention the role that Ayurveda assigns to intersex bodies. So Ayurveda initially understands these bodies as bodies which are distinct, which are anokha, which are amusing, slightly strange but still amusing. But when you move to Madhava Nidana or Sharangadhara Samhita, these are understood to be impotent bodies. So if you look at Charaka, for instance, you have the mention of 8 kinds of non-heterosexual or non-heteronormative individuals. You have the Dviretas, you have the Pavanendriya, you have the Samskaravahi, you have the Narashanda, you have the Nari Shanda, you have the Vakri, if you have the Irsha Bhiradi, you have the Vatika. Similarly, if you look at the Susruta Samhita, there are 9. You have these 8 and then you have the Kliba. So you see that there are very many kinds of sexualities, very many kinds of bodies, which are very diverse, which might even be referred to as deviant, which are mentioned in the Ayurvedic record. But this kind of indexes, this kind of theorization completely collapses or completely shrinks as we move to the medieval text. In fact, instead of all these terms, you find only one term, which is either Napumsaga in some text or Kliba being used. And very clearly, they're not understood as transgendered persons, they're understood as impotent men. So from fully fledged human beings who might be slightly different, you have Ayurveda conceptualizing them in a later period as people with bodily disorders. So sexuality is shrunk to being understood as a bodily disorder. So both in terms of intersex people as well as in terms of women or female biological process, you see that there is an idealization of the male body, which is the central logic that Ayurveda weaves its narrative through. And I think we have exceeded time, so let's wrap it up here.